In the world of true crime, some cases are solved by a single fingerprint, a strand of DNA, or a crucial eyewitness. But others are defined not by the evidence that is found, but by the evidence that is seen. A piece of the puzzle so public, so haunting, that it taunts investigators and the public alike. This is the story of Valinda Williams, a murder solved by a conviction, yet forever haunted by a ghost in a photograph. Valinda Williams was just 23 years old in the spring of 1978. She lived in the city of Portland, Oregon, and by all accounts, she was a vibrant young woman with her whole life ahead of her. She worked at a local JCPenney, had a wide circle of friends, and was deeply in love with her fiancé, a man named Jeffrey Lee. But beneath the surface of this happy life, there was an undercurrent of fear. Valinda had confided in friends and family that she was being followed and harassed by a former co-worker, a man named John Ackroyd. She was scared enough to have obtained a restraining order against him. It was a fear that tragically would prove to be justified. On April 17, 1978, Valinda finished her shift at JCPenney and went to a local restaurant, Jolly Jones, with her mother and sister. It was a completely ordinary evening. After the meal, around 8:30 p.m., Valinda left to meet her fiancé, Jeffrey. She walked to a nearby parking garage to retrieve her car. It was the last time her family would ever see her alive. When she didn't arrive to meet Jeffrey, he knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. The police were called. Her car was found abandoned days later, but of Valinda, there was no trace. The investigation immediately focused on John Ackroyd, the man she had feared, but without a body and with no physical evidence linking him to her disappearance, the case stalled. For months, Valinda Williams was a missing person, and the trail grew colder with each passing day. Nearly a year later, on March 6, 1979, the grim mystery was partially solved. A group of loggers working in a remote, heavily wooded area near the Columbia River Gorge, about 50 miles from Portland, made a horrific discovery. Partially buried under leaves and debris was a human skull. Dental records confirmed the unimaginable. It was Valinda Williams. The rest of her skeleton was scattered nearby. The medical examiner determined she had been shot in the head. Now, a missing persons case was officially a murder investigation. The prime suspect remained John Ackroyd, a former security guard and, ominously, a former military policeman. He was known to have a violent temper, but again, prosecutors felt they lacked the evidence for a conviction. The case went cold once more, leaving Valinda's family in a torturous limbo. For years, Valinda's family grieved without answers. Then, in 1986, on the 8th anniversary of her disappearance, they held a public memorial service to keep her memory alive and to appeal for new information. A local news station, KATU, was there to cover the event. They filmed the somber gathering, the family, the friends, the tears. It was a poignant but routine piece of news footage. That is, until the tape was reviewed later. A sharp-eyed news editor, scanning the crowd shots, noticed something chilling. Standing calmly among the mourners was a man. He was watching the proceedings with an unsettling stillness, and he was holding a single, long-stemmed red rose. The family was shown the footage. Their reaction was of shock and horror. The man with the rose was John Ackroyd. The image was staggering. Here was the prime suspect in a young woman's murder, not just attending her memorial, but standing as a silent, brazen spectator. Was it an act of remorse, a final goodbye, or was it something far more sinister? a final act of dominance and cruelty, a way to insert himself back into the narrative and torment the grieving family. For investigators, it was a psychological bombshell, but it was not concrete evidence. They could prove he was there, but they couldn't prove he killed her. The photograph became the central, haunting artifact of the case. A ghost at the funeral, a killer in plain sight. The case against John Ackroyd would not see movement for another 2 decades. Advances in DNA technology and a renewed investigative focus brought him to trial. However, the evidence for murder was still circumstantial. In a stunning turn, Ackroyd was brought to court not for Valinda's murder, but for the unrelated kidnapping and rape of 2 other women in the late 1970s. His pattern of stalking and violence was laid bare. In 2005, based on this overwhelming evidence and the testimony of his past victims, John Ackroyd was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. During the investigation into these crimes, he was formally named by prosecutors as the sole suspect in the murder of Valinda Williams. For her family, it was a form of justice, but it was not a closure. Ackroyd never confessed. He never revealed what he did with her body for that year. He never explained why he attended her memorial. So while John Ackroyd sits in prison for his other horrific crimes, the murder of Valinda Williams remains officially unsolved. He is the only person of interest, the man she feared, the man who brazenly stood at her memorial. But without a confession or a murder conviction, a shadow of doubt remains, not for the police and not for the family, but in the cold, hard files of the Portland Police Bureau. The story of Valinda Williams is not just a cold case. It is a story of a life stolen, a family's relentless pursuit of justice, and a photograph that speaks 1,000 terrifying words. It asks us how we define a solved case. Is it a conviction, or is it the undeniable truth that stares back at us from a crowd of mourners holding a single red rose?